All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for today's Metaverse panel. As you might have noticed, hopefully people have found the right location. We are not in quote unquote Sector Zero today. We're on the very, very beginnings of the Metaverse campus. There's a big amphitheater and, I don't know, some outdoor parkour stuff for people to jump around on. We don't have classrooms or auditoriums or other things yet. We do have, a nice place to kick around. Today, we're joined with three important builders, broadly what I would call in the metaverse ecosystem. What we're going to do today is learn what they're doing, ask them easier or harder questions, depending on how things go, and then find out what our future is going to look like. Because it's not just what's going to happen this year. I'd like to know what's going to happen in 2030, 2035, so I can get mentally prepared for launching myself into the metaverse, and be interesting to hear the point of view of this group. And then, as always, at the end, we will have some time for questions from the audience. So, uh, by all means, keep track of what you'd like to ask, and we'll cover it at the end. So, before we get into specifics, I think it is important that we give our guests the opportunity to properly introduce themselves. They are all three very interesting people. They have interesting backgrounds and they are working on interesting projects. So we're going to go through one by one, learn a little bit about how they ended up here working on these cutting edge topics and what specifically they're working on right now. We'll do that, then we'll get to the questions. Let's start with Charlie.
All right. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. So a little on my background. Well, I'm Charlie. I'm the founder of Restless and Charlie Cohen fashion brand. I started the Charlie Cohen brand back in 2012. And although it was a physical fashion brand, everything was very much based around internet culture. So throughout my fashion degree, which had been the prior 4 years, I was sort of very involved as a blogger, and involved in a lot of digital discourse. I was well aware by that time that my digital identity was as valuable, if not more valuable to me than my physical identity. And it was something that I really wanted to bring into physical collections. So whether that was certain activations around each collection, what kind of platforms we could build for having a conversation around the themes for each collection, plugging into meme culture and so on. And then after a couple of years, I'd say around 2015, we started getting to experiment with AR and VR as well, and being able to kind of take this digital storytelling to another level, and really start creating alternate experiences to traditional fashion events like fashion weeks, like typical lookbook shoots and so on. And it was a much more interesting way to connect with our community, who very much weren't at these shows on the traditional fashion calendar. 2019, we started getting to work with the gaming industry, and that was really the first time I got deep into designing digital wearables, and having digital physical crossover. And going into 2020, we were in a great position for the pandemic where we could create these virtual immersive story worlds and retail experiences and digital collections as well. And off the back of that, we ended up working with a lot of big brands like Pokemon, Hello Kitty, Assassin's Creed, Reebok, and started getting to do all of these proof of concept experiments around phygital and around interoperability. And we weren't tackling interoperability from a blockchain perspective at that time. We were just integrating with lots of different virtual social environments and game environments where there'd be a version of an asset that was available in each of those spaces. So it really it helped to prove out the interest in interoperable identity, but it was still a pretty convoluted experience. As a user, you'd have to go into each of these individual environments, go through a separate checkout flow. And then from a licensing side, everything would have to be contracted out separately as well. So it was a nice idea, but certainly not scalable. And I went down the NFT rabbit hole as I was searching for some kind of tech solution to streamline things. because the goal was to be able to have one central hub. You could buy something once and then be able to take it into as many places as you wanted. And as I got more and more involved in that space and that community, one, I realized that this was a huge issue that everybody was talking about and trying to figure out. And two, that the ethos of Web3 and decentralization really resonated with me. My own challenges about being involved in traditional fashion industry, traditional creative industry, the ethical implications of that. I really liked the idea of being able to be part of building something that could kickstart a new generation of creatives and designers. So I shifted my focus from the brand and started building Restless at the beginning of 2021. And the main premise of Restless is it's an easy way for any creator or brand to easily build and customize interoperable wearables that can plug into both open metaverse and traditional game environments, as well as have physical counterparts.
Excellent. Maxime, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure, and thank you for having me. I'm super happy to be here, super happy to tell you more about my experience. Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then it will just make sense what the company that I'm building is. So I've been into VR now for something like the past 7 years, probably. A little bit about myself. I grew up in the countryside of France, in the middle of nowhere. I was the only teenager in my village. And so mostly I grew up with books and computers, and I made most of my friends online. And when I was probably around 14 years old, the Oculus from Palmer Luckey came out. And that was like a very big deal back then. And my first thought was, this is amazing. If I could have this device, I could hang out with my online friends. Problem is I was a teenager, so I couldn't afford to buy a VR headset. Because you have to imagine it was like $1,000 at the time. So I thought maybe I can build one by myself, and I spent about a year sort of building this VR headset from scratch, and basically ended up building the same thing as an Oculus, but much cheaper. And I got super lucky. There was at the time no resources on how to build a VR headset, so I sort of had to figure all of that by myself. And in doing so, I did things slightly differently. And you might even say in some very specific aspects, slightly better than Oculus. So I did that at the time. Facebook heard about it. They flew me over to the US. I got to spend time with the executive team. Atman Binstock, their chief architect, loved their engineering team, loved how passionate those people were about VR, but realized the leadership was, in my opinion, I felt like those people were clueless about VR and about where VR was headed. And so I decided to take everything I'd built and open source it all, the hardware, the firmware, the software, the algorithm, pretty much everything. Dropped out of high school. I was something like 15 years old at the time, and dedicated the following 4 years really trying to work on the edge of research in VR, both from a hardware and software perspective, and game engines and graphics and art. And there's many things we can talk about later. And as a side note, if some of you are familiar with it, back then I wrote one of the first rendering plugin for Unity, which is used to make about half of the video games in the world. And so I created some stuff that are still being used by people today in terms of like the actual engine of how VR works. So that was pretty nice. And we have a fantastic relationship with Unity people in general. And the turning point came, I'm sorry, maybe I'm taking a little long, but there's a point to this story. The turning point came, that was the Quest 2, the VR headset that I'm sure you're all familiar with. And that VR headset there was a before and an after. Everyone bought that VR headset. They all played with it for about a week, right? Trying to beat my score at Beat Saber or whatever that is. And usually what you find is that after 1 week, people just stop using it. And they take it and they put it on a shelf behind them and just collecting dust, and they just stop using it, right? And the truth is, the VR biggest use case is people are going to be using it for like a week, then they're going to put it on a shelf, and then maybe once or twice a year, a friend's visit or family visit, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, you want to try it out? And you're going to take it out and have your friends try it, and that's pretty much it. Okay, so that was VR back then. To this day, VR still suffer from those problems. And it turns out that I have very strong conviction as for why that is the case. And we can go very deep into that. But I'm essentially convinced that as of right now, the technology is already there to make a VR headset that people use every day. The designers are already there, the storytelling, the marketing, all of those things could be made. I just think that Meta is not the right company to do it. And so I went out there, explained exactly how to do it to other companies. For instance, Unity, right? I love my people from Unity. I went to them, explained to them, hey, this is how you make VR such that it does not make people sick anymore. And Unity said, that sounds awesome. Go and ask someone else to build it. So I was like, okay, sure. So then I go and ask NVIDIA, because they use some of my stuff as well. And NVIDIA says, that sounds awesome. Go and ask Qualcomm. So I go and talk to Qualcomm, and you guessed it, basically no one wanted to build it. And so at the time, I reached out to Naval Ravikant, that you might be familiar with. He's an investor in crypto and Metaverse and many stuff. And Naval convinced me to build my own company. And so I just started this company and said, if no one wants to build it, I'm going to build it myself. And we started off really focused on software, then started expanding into the hardware part of it. And now we're starting to go deep into the design and marketing of that whole thing. Nothing that we've done is public yet, but I'm super happy to talk about it nonetheless. So we've been very stealthy. And just so you have an understanding of where the company is at, so we're based in Mountain View, California. We've raised quite some money. We're actually the best funded company in VR hardware currently. And we're a super nice team that I'm very proud of. People from Apple, people from Sony, and people from Meta. And some of those people that worked on stuff that you've seen before, some of those people you've even seen on stage before, as those people were on stage during Apple's keynotes. And so, yeah, that's what we do today. That's what I work on. And I guess as a tiny bit more piece of a context, I come very much from hardware, but sort of then graduated into trying to become much better at software. And the past, I would say, year or so has been really about design and marketing. And so I guess where my perspective might be interesting for a question is I have a pretty good understanding of what it takes for VR to go mainstream, but also the history of how stuff goes mainstream. And it might be interesting to talk about some of my perspective on why is it that some things like crypto or VR might seem like they are experiencing what some people might call a winter. And how do you get through that? And maybe I can bring some historical perspective on that. So that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And Ryan, you want to tell us about yourself and On Cyber?
After this introduction, it's pretty hard for me to be able to talk about myself. No, I mean, like the story of On Cyber and myself is really the story of a kid who wanted to do something useful in Web3. I think I started getting interested into crypto like when I was about 12 or 13, like long time ago. I didn't directly get into crypto, but got into like really admired the tech. Took me about 10 years to finally get in and build a product in it. In the meantime, I was building products and I love to program and such. My dad is in the art world, so I had been around art creation and art and contacts with artists, etc. for my whole life. When mid 2020, I find out about NFTs and directly it clicks. Like I directly notice what it can do for creatives, what it can do for the relations that creatives have with their collectors, where in the art world, there's like a very centralized system for people to go and get the approval of dealers and gallerists and whatnot. I thought Web3 and NFTs could come in to like free up our creatives all around the world. Like a kid like myself from Morocco, and I know so many examples, would be able to go and sell stuff on Foundation and whatnot and make money without ever having to kiss the hand of a random art dealer in Morocco. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But at the time when I started to look at this, there were very few platforms that would allow people to storytell with art. I think at the time, the biggest platforms were Decentraland and CryptoVoxels in the immersive space, and then the other options for curation would be in 2D. Of course, like adding a dimension makes it easier for people to curate art and to enjoy art. So we needed like a proper immersive experience or immersive experience platform for people to showcase and discover art and to like visualize Web3, well, like the culture in Web3 in a sense. But there were none. And the only way to get into curation in Web3 at the time was to go buy a land on Decentraland and hire an architect and do a bunch of very redundant actions just to be able to exhibit art. Most people were actually going and buying land on these platforms to do exactly those functions. And so I went and thought, hey, there is definitely a use case somewhere here where people want to showcase their assets in immersive spaces and connect around immersive spaces. I do not know what this metaverse is ever going to be. I do not know what exactly people are going to want to do, but I know I can have a link with a bunch of people right now that are early adopters that want to experience with these technologies. And so the idea was we're going to go and build like this simplest product for people to place and discover assets in immersive spaces. And from there, like try to listen as much as possible for the community's feedback and what people want to do in these immersive spaces to just build layer after layer after layer for something that makes sense. What we're doing today in OM, for example, like I would have never guessed when I was in this very same bedroom at my parents' house in Morocco when I started the company 2 years ago. But again, I think the one thing that we've had within the team is that we've always been very open as to what this could be, what the metaverse landscape is going to be, what the immersive web should be, and we just kept on listening to our community, building another layer and building another functionality. So I think the story of On Cyber is a company that's fully bottom up, that listens to people, that will always go and find like the latest piece of feedback that our users want, and we'll go and implement that so that we end up having a product that truly resonates with real humans rather than just having ideas about what an immersive world should be and just developing it from the ground up until it's ready. So yeah, that's pretty much me and my story.
Okay, this was fantastic. I now have about 11 million questions. Let me start with some specific questions addressed to specific people, and then later we'll do the more integrative ones. And again, I want to start with Charlie, and I want to give you the opportunity to address the following thing that I have heard 1 billion times. I don't want digital wearables. Why do I need digital wearables? I want real clothes. I want a real purse. Why would I spend money on that stuff? Obviously, this is not NFT people. Let's call it normal people, right? So when I've had this discussion, I go, what are NFTs good for? Start saying different things, and one of the things I always say is digital wearables. And 80% of the time, this is the answer. And I give my response, but my guess is you probably have a better, more nuanced thought on this. So the floor is yours.
Sure. So I think usually my first question in response to that mentality is, have you ever used a profile picture? Have you ever curated an Instagram feed? Have you ever used a filter on social media? Generally, the answer to at least one of those things, if not all three of them, is yes. And then we can start digging into, well, clearly you care about your digital identity to some extent. And, as technology develops and your digital identity is represented kind of increasingly in 3D spaces and as an avatar, then wearables are going to be the equivalent to changing your profile picture or curating your Instagram feed. And then, also is always nice to, point out the $60 billion skins industry within traditional gaming as well. There is a complete precedent for a whole generation, 2 generations, that value their digital identity enough to be investing heavily in in-game wearables. And this doesn't even have the functionality of NFTs where you own it, where you can take it into other spaces, where it's often you can't resell it for actual money. And NFT wearables are taking something that is already a massive industry and making it even more valuable and even more scalable. But I think usually the key is just focusing in on digital identity, which is something that most people have been participating in for the last couple of decades. And then it starts to click a little bit more why sometime in the future they might be investing in that in a slightly different way.
Okay, so I agree with everything you said, obviously. But what if someone says, that's fine, of course I have a profile picture on Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter, and they might even be different. But I didn't spend money on it, and I put one once. It's not like I'm changing it all the time. Is this something? And gaming, now I hear you on gaming, but that's like, I don't know, for people who play a lot of games. Is this just something for people who play games? I'm a normal person. I have a social media presence. I'm not a big gamer. Is this just something that's not for me, or is it going to be different?
Well, I guess then it comes to the concept of fashion and subculture and community, full stop. So it's like, okay, have you ever done anything within the physical world, made a physical purchase because in some way it connected you more to a community, in some way it was a flex? Have you ever bought a pair of limited edition sneakers? What was the reason behind that? And then it's sort of taking that and okay, well, if the only place that, or the primary place that you're going to be connecting with that community or showcasing that flex is in digital, then isn't the digital version of that asset actually more valuable?
Yep. No, I think the fashion, why you buy some combination of why you buy a limited edition sneaker and what your profile picture is and why it changes in the skins, somewhere in there is the reality. I think there is probably some room for us as a community to find a shorter, pithier way to get this across. The way the Team Bitcoin figured this out, right? How do they talk about Bitcoin? You hold or it's digital gold or what have you. There's probably something there because it's a very common response on this topic. And practically, it'll probably just happen naturally, but maybe we can accelerate. All right. Anything you want to add there, or should I go to Maxime?
I think we can go over to Maxime.
All right, Maxime, let me make sure I understood this correctly. You went around to all the biggest technology companies in the world, all like multiple tens or hundreds of billions of dollars or trillions, and you have concluded none of them know how to build a headset, so you're going to build your own. Did I understand this correctly? You didn't say it that way. I'm summarizing it the way I understood it. You're going to build a better headset. This is the takeaway.
Yeah. I think I can build. I think we, the company, and it's many people. I think we have a shot at building a better VR headset, and I mean that's in a very holistic sense. I think one critical aspect of, as I'm sure you realize, actually being in crypto, is it's not only about the product; it's also about the messaging of the product and your ability to convey that and to educate people about it. And yeah, I'm happy to be more specific, but I think the way you broke it down would be accurate, although I wouldn't say it like that.
Right, of course not, because you're modest and appropriate. But what does a better headset mean? Facebook has put, I don't know how many billions of dollars into a headset. And you're saying, okay, well, that's cool. I'm a smart guy. Mine's going to be better. Why is it going to be better? How is it going to be better? What's missing today that when your headset comes out, we'll be much happier?
Sure. I think that's a fascinating question, and one way I'll try to answer is, rather than going into the very specifics of specific difference between my headset and their headset, maybe I can try doing, and if it's interesting, we can sort of keep pulling on that thread, is talk a little bit about the cultural differences between the people making decisions at Meta or Apple and the people that I'm a part of, and that most people in this sort of metaverse movement are a part of, and where are the cultural differences between them. And the reason for that is, one of my belief is, if you look at a company like Google has tried many times to compete with Apple in the smartphone market. And Google has infinite amount of money, and yet they're not able to compete with Apple, right? Like their phone are selling much less units than the iPhone. So they're not able to compete with the iPhone despite having infinite amount of money. So it means that there's something else that Apple has that Google does not have. And that thing is a set of belief. And that thing is essentially culture. And so rather than telling you exactly the specs in terms of difference, I think it's worth it to talk about the cultural differences between Meta, Apple, and those companies and us. And if I try to break down those cultural differences, the most important point, and I think that if you have one thing to take away from me, it would be that it's the fact that to those people, virtual worlds have a zero-sum game relationship with the real world. So it essentially means is that to those people, the time you spend in a virtual world is time lost in real life. It's like -1 hour spent in that virtual world. It's like 1 hour that you're not spending in real life. And it's like this idea of like wasted time. And I think it's pretty deep into the psyche of those people. And so one of the consequences of that is in the way they design the headset and the way they design the experiences and the marketing of it, basically what they try to convince you of is take your life and move your entire life to the metaverse. And then the reaction that people have to that is, well, this is going to take away stuff from my real life that I would rather not do in VR, right? Like the public perception of VR is pretty dystopian, because people think that, no, I want to make friends in real life, not only in VR. And so the mental framework of those people is always trying to put in opposition the real life and VR. Whereas what I find with my friends and myself and sort of the people either from my generation or with the same kind of interest is that they really think of virtual worlds in their daily life as sort of this balanced relationship where some of the most valuable time in their real life came as a result of the time they spent in virtual worlds. And so in that sense, I would say the core difference is Meta is trying to think about how to keep you inside the VR headset as long as possible. I'm trying hard to think about how can I make you very happy when you take the VR headset off. It's like, what do you get away from the experience? And so I realize it's a little bit abstract, so let me make that, let me get into more specific examples. Let me try to think of a great one. All right. I'm sure most of you are familiar with VR chat, and I'm sure as many of you are familiar with Facebook Horizon, which is the competitor to VR chat. And it seems as though, regardless of how much money Meta is pouring into Horizon, Horizon is not able to compete with VR chat. Right? VR chat is just winning, whereas Horizon is not. And if you try to think, how is that possible? Why can't they just copy VR chat and do the exact same thing? the reason why that is not possible is that as much as the people using VR chat every day, and I've used VR chat a lot, love the time they spend inside VR chat, the most valuable thing they get out of VR chat actually happens outside of VR. It's the fact that those friends that you've made in VR chat, they just become friends as a whole in like your daily life, like the rest of your life. And you might even try to meet them in real life. It's the ability to be able to go inside VR chat, and after you've had maybe a long or stressful day, talk to people and sort of have them and have like those sort of deep, emotional, meaningful conversation. And then you get out of VR and you feel better. It's like all those things that happen in VR and directly reflect back in your real life. And somehow every time something has like that characteristic, it happens in VR but reflects in your real life, Meta is just not able to do it right. And instead, what they offer you is, no, instead we're going to take, we're just going to increase the amount of time you can spend in VR. So if you look at the feature list of Horizon, they prioritize stuff like bring your laptop to Horizon, because that's the way to sort of, they think that's going to like try to keep you longer in Horizon, as opposed to how do we increase the ratio of meaningful conversation in Horizon as opposed to non-meaningful conversation. And like the way you design that changes, like the way you think about that changes widely the design of like the social platform. So that would be like my very, very abstract, high-level answer. That like I'm happy to dive into it, but I'm also realizing you might want something a little more specific. So I'll also share some specific details about my headset. In terms of the philosophy of the headset itself, yeah, I'm trying to be mindful of the time at the same time, but I also want to give you a little bit of a nugget about the headset. So I'll choose one vertical, and then I'm happy to talk about more. So one vertical would be, how do we think about comfort? And for that, I have to tell you a little bit more about, again, how those companies design their VR headset. So the way a VR headset is usually designed is you have a team that's going to come up with a list of features. Some of them are going to be hard requirements, some of them are not. Stuff like facial tracking or body tracking or whatever. Once you have those features, you define what you need to achieve those features, and then you build those gigantic prototypes, like the one you saw in maybe Zuckerberg's video. And once you have the gigantic prototypes, you try to make them smaller, and then you send that to a factory, try to make it as small as possible without it breaking, and then you have a headset, and then you put that to market. That's how a VR headset is traditionally designed. One of the things we've decided to do at Unai is to absolutely refuse to do that. And we start the other way. We try to make VR headset just made out of plastic, and we just try to make them as comfortable as possible. And then we put them on a ton of people, we put weights inside, and we try to see when they stop being comfortable. And we find those thresholds, and we spend a lot of time trying to find what is comfortable, what is not. And then we work it backwards, and we say, okay, what features can we fit inside the headset without it stopping to be comfortable? And what we find is that there's a lot of features out there that you might not have in the Unai VR headset. But that's because we started from this perspective of comfortable, maybe had to remove a few features. And our criteria, when we looked at that feature, is, does that feature, and that's how it ties back with the beginning of my story, does that feature benefits you once you take off the headset, yes or no? And does it make a significant difference? So for instance, a VR headset that you might have heard of, the Pimax, it's like this 1 kilogram gigantic thing that, I'm not making this up, is like this large. And the Pimax, I don't know if I can say this publicly, but the difference in resolution between our headset and the Pimax, which is the headset with the highest resolution of all time, it's like, again, this 1 kilogram gigantic big thing on your face. The percentage of like more resolution that they have is in the single digit range. That's like what I'll share for now. But for that single digit, it's so hard to increase resolution that it results in this like gigantic system that is incredibly heavy with like 2 big cables plugged at the back of it. And that system is indeed like, I don't know, like 4 times higher resolution than a Quest. But the price of it is like being so huge. In our case, we're not quite to that resolution, but we've been so hardcore about ergonomics that like it fits into something that is about 1/10 of the weight of that thing. So it's like this is probably one of the most ergonomic VR headset out there. So and again, that's because we ask ourselves, at the end of the day, if the resolution was like even twice as much, when you take off the headset, what are the chances that you're like, oh yeah, like this is really making my day much better that the resolution was like twice as much? It matters, but not as much as people think. And thus it shouldn't have that big of an influence on the design. So anyway, that was a long answer, but that's sort of how we approach things.
Long answer and still did not reveal any trade secrets. We did not manage to, find out. All right, let's go. Let's go to Ryan. I want to ask Ryan something very specific. Yes, it started art focused. Now it's doing many things. But for me, what had always attracted me to On Cyber, and I've spent an infinity amount of time working on On Cyber, as Ryan knows, is your goal objective of it being open, built on open standards. What does that mean? What does open mean? What does closed mean? How does it differ? What are the opportunities, challenges, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, like, so one thing is on Cyber is a child of the Web3 space. So like we started because we wanted to like fulfill the need within the Web3 space, not necessarily because we wanted to build general immersive experiences or whatnot. So the whole point has been that we have been building with very strong foundations for a progressive decentralization. I think there's a lot of companies in the space that like are built with different principles and want to be open, but at some point, like when your foundations aren't able to be open, like it's very hard for you to ever be part of an open type of space. What that means in our case is that from the ground up, we built On Cyber on free open source software, so there's no proprietary engine involved, and we're never going to have to answer to a big corporation that would own the proprietary engine or have a say in what's happening with their engine, which is not the case for everyone, and it's hard to do because like you have to rebuild a lot of things from the ground up. But I think it's the way that you can truly be free long term and have your users and community free. Number two is that we make sure that all assets are stored in the open. So there's like the whole principle of Web3 is your content, and you can take it whatever you want. There is nothing within On Cyber that isn't stored in the open. Of course, like there's decentralized storage is not necessarily always the most efficient or fast or performant type of solution for storage, which is why we always have like surfacing CDNs and different services that do things faster. But at the end of the day, all data is stored in the open and can be taken and taken from, like, I don't know, let's take the example of all spaces built within On Cyber or this space Meta Campus that we're on right now. It is, yes, stored on a CDN, but also stored on IPFS. And if need be, if ever tomorrow something happened and On Cyber wasn't working anymore, you could totally take this space, take it to another platform that uses the same standard we do, which is a pretty open, like pretty common standard in the web called GLTF, which is like what I would say is the equivalent of an HTML in the immersive web, and you would be able to run exactly the same space, exactly the same architecture in a completely different platform. So for me, what open means is, number one, you can restrict access to it and everyone can participate, which is why we don't have Google login or anything similar, but you can just log in with any type of wallet, and soon enough can log in without a wallet even. Number two, I think that I spoke about it before. You cannot have proprietary tech at the basis of the tech, and so we have chosen not to go with anything proprietary or a proprietary engine, and that there's very low cost to switching. So you don't want to make it so that people come in and are locked into it. Like most Web2 platforms do, like Instagram does or whatnot. Like there's no way to go port your content easily. But with us, like the idea is to have all those principles and follow them very, very closely. Of course, we don't know what, like, as I said, OnCyber is a work in progress. It's a bottom-up type of product, and we cannot know everything we need to do to everything we need to decentralize in order to be truly open from the ground up. But all our foundations are very open, and as we go, without losing too much time on, oh, I think this should be decentralized or stored on chain or off chain or whatnot, we can go pretty fast while having a clear avenue for decentralization whenever we know exactly what that means and how that can be done efficiently. So yeah, that's pretty much like what I think we are doing right now to be able to be open to be part of the open metaverse. Yeah.
Okay. Usually, I mean, this is the story of many things. Usually, centralized solutions, at a minimum, start with some advantages, right? They usually tend to, they're more convenient or they're more easily packaged up or they come with more prepackaged features or what have you. And sometimes it has worked out that open standards have taken a hold, HTML, not the information superhighway. Other times, Linux for the desktop never really happened, but Linux eventually, over decades, won the server market. How do you view the strategic landscape here between a wide variety of closed or semi-closed platforms, using quite mature game engines in most cases, right? Unreal Engine or Unity, who don't have to worry about don't have to spend any cycles, development cycles or feature cycles and performance cycles trying to keep it decentralized and say, like, well, whatever, we're going to deliver end user experience. How do you see this?
It's a very interesting question, and I think we have to go back to like our tech stacks to try to start answering this question. When I started OnCyber, like there were of course like many choices we had to make. Like, what do we want to? What's the target? What's the target for the build of OnCyber? How people are going to access it? Like what's going to happen there? We chose the browser because to me today is the most open type of distribution channel to go and reach people with apps. Like web apps are very hardly censored and can be distributed as you want if people have a link. So we decided to go with that, and with that chose Three.js as a technology for like the basis of our tech. So the Linux in this case would be Three.js/WebGL/WebGPU, I guess. And then our focus is to make sure that we can build the best possible experience for our users and build the best possible UX for people to come in and enjoy being in those immersive worlds, which are themselves like run by WebGL, WebGPU soon, and free open source software.
Okay. Let's do another round on kind of state of today in adoption. I'm going to go back to Charlie. Where are digital wearables now? Right? Where are people using them? How many are using them? What types of things are you seeing developing in the background that, our average person today might not know about? And how do you expect this to change over the next 1, 2, 3 years?
Sure. So I think like the key use cases for digital wearables right now are either in-game and like thinking more traditional gaming industry, where there's like the daily active user base, generally a younger audience, as collectibles. So I guess you're more like typical Web3 speculative NFT investment, or as a way to unlock either physical redeemables, so like physical wearable utility, or more as like ticketing to events. So a lot of traditional fashion brands that have tried to enter the NFT space have based the utility around like access to fashion shows, special like VIP access within their flagship stores and so on. So everything is quite heavily focused around existing fashion use cases, like you're literally wearing it in the physical world in a game, or it's giving you some kind of status. And I think right now the best Web3 use case for digital identity is the PFP. And you wouldn't necessarily think of that as fashion, but it's doing very much the same thing. It's like signaling you as part of a community. It's saying something about your status. It's saying something about how early you are into the Web3 space. It's communicating a lot in the same way that fashion does. So I see the evolution of wearables. Like, what does the PFP mean as we start to socialize more in 3D spaces, as interoperable identity in open metaverse actually becomes something that there is like clear use case for. So it relies a lot, I think, initially on a move from like text-based social media like Twitter and Discord into social media happening within 3D spaces, which there are lots of amazing builders very proactively working on at the moment. The gaming use case isn't going to go away, but we are a way off traditional game developers allowing external assets into their games. There's definitely an intent from the big game developers like Epic, Ubisoft, Roblox to start exploring how they integrate with Web3. Nobody really wants to be a first mover. There's a lot of pushback from the gaming community as well. So I guess one of the first things that needs to happen there is just entirely abstracting away from talking about Web3 and NFTs. And just creating new language around it, so there isn't this visceral reaction from their existing player bases. I think one of the first things that we'll see around interoperability within game developers is just within properties that developer owns. So for example, Epic opening up wearables and assets so it can be used across like Fall Guys, Rocket League, Fortnite, and so on. And I think we will start to see specific partnerships with these game developers where they are exploring a level of interoperability, but it's still going to be extremely policed and sort of very narrow in terms of the partners that they work with. In terms of traditional fashion industry coming in, I think it's a less interesting proposition than new gen brands that are Web3 native starting up. I think there's, as we kind of touched on with the first question you asked me, there's a whole lot of convincing for a large subset of people of the value of digital wearables. I think that luxury fashion brands that came into the space over the last couple of years, and consulted for some of them, were extremely surprised to find that none of their existing customer base were interested in adopting Web3 or buying NFTs, and that actually their entire Web3 business needed to be contingent on their involvement in the Web3 community. So there's still a huge division, I think, between Gen Alpha, Gen Z, who are used to the idea of digital wearable utility, a more traditional, I guess, as you said, normal demographic where you need some kind of physical utility to make it make sense, and Web3 audience where there's the understanding of collecting something and it having value over time. But I think, the main first big step for adoption is social media in 3D spaces being the norm.
So this is fascinating what you said, because I think it matches what we see for the most part in art. The major NFT art collectors are not, on the whole, there's some famous exceptions, but on the whole, they are not big traditional art collectors. They are people who grew up in the Web3 space and then found that NFT art of various types represents their values and culture and what have you. You're saying the same thing is happening in fashion?
Yes, exactly. You have very divided demographics, and it's it's completely like based on how do you value your identity, and if your identity is born of internet culture, like most of us in this space, that's where you're going to pin more value. It's where you're going to be willing to spend more time, more money, like whatever investment looks like to you. Whereas if status or identity has always been rooted in your physical world or physical community, it's very difficult to imagine that switch. And my parents and family are in the traditional art space, like art dealers, antiques dealers. So I've seen like that side of what status looks like, and the the challenge in explaining the value of what a digital collectible looks like to somebody whose entire business is dealing in physical. And I can see like Ryan is smiling. Same situation. I mean, I say that my mum has signed up to this university course and is like fully degened into Web3, but certainly it's like a big learning curve. Whereas I'd say especially my like younger friends and also like younger team members, absolutely normal to them that they would be spending more time worrying about what their digital identity, digital community, and online friends are up to.
This is fascinating. I think it's right. I think we're going to have a generational shift. It'll be massive, but it'll take time because it's generational. Where do you think and I mean, nobody knows for sure, and there's, of course, huge examples on either side, right? Like, there's some more digitally native older people, there's some boomerish younger people. We know that's the case. But broadly, if you had to like pick a number, what age or what year of birth, or where does the internet native generation start? Who are they?
I would say it's Gen Alpha, internet native in terms of their like. It's just the standard for them that all of their socializing takes place in like avatar-based virtual environments. They already understand the idea of trading in digital identity. Like it's the 8 to 12-year-olds right now who are already doing that in Roblox and Minecraft. I think with Gen Z and like this is just like speculative based on like just I guess my own observations. I think there is a little bit more seriousness in that generation, where the idea of I guess like exploring identity, like starting a business, trading within the digital world, like those feel I guess not as comfortable compared to like the younger like siblings and cousins in my family who are this like younger Roblox generation. So we pin like so much hope on Gen Z as like, okay, this is going to be the metaverse future, but I think there's actually a lot more resistance there. And if you spend any time on TikTok and have ever looked at posts around NFTs, the vitriol from that generation around NFTs and Web3 is probably the highest of any generation.
So Gen Z is going to let us down again, huh?
I mean, sorry, Gen Z.
Okay, very interesting. All right, let's switch to Maxime. And Maxime, you said something in your initial remarks, and I laughed because I don't know, back in 2013, I think it was 2013. I think it was Christmas of 2013. I was in New York, and the first Samsung Gear VR device came out. If it wasn't 13, it was 12. And so I bought it. I have this general rule. I'm for sure the oldest person on this panel, but I have a general rule, and I will share it with everyone. It's a good way to try and not become outdated. Anytime a new technological thing happens, I just do it without thinking about if it makes sense or not. Because if you think about if it makes sense, as you pass, I don't know, the age of 25 or 30, somewhere in there, you suddenly think like nothing actually makes sense. Oh no, that's not the, things that, who wrote it? It was Douglas Adams wrote it. So things that happen before you were 25 are a natural state of the world, right? Things that when you're 25 to 40 are an exciting career opportunity, and things that are invented after 40 are terrible and against the natural order of things, right? Like this is how this is how humans default work, and you should assume you will be a default human, and so you should assume your bias is going to be against new things once you get past, I don't know, 25 or 27 or 30. So I have this general rule now. Once I start getting that, okay, whatever happens, anything new, I just do it. I take away from myself the decision of should I spend money on a VR set. There's a VR set, I'm going to buy it. They didn't know anything about VR. No, I put it on. I think it had like that helicopter in Iceland scene or something.
Mhm.
I was like, holy, and I'm not going to say this was a university course, but this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. This is like, so then I called my mom and my dad and like everyone I know, and I was like, you got to come over. And everyone's like, you got to be kidding me. This is amazing. And a month later, it was sitting on the shelf gathering dust. And I have, the Oculus 2, and it's more or less sitting on the shelf. I mean, I've gone in to see Ob with it, right? But here I am actively building a platform that displays on the web and displays in VR. And I would say 99% of the time I spend in that platform is on the web. It's not in VR. And it's not in VR because, quite frankly, at least for me, I find it to be kind of a pain in the ass. I want to check out something at home. Going through the browser is easy. Going and finding the headset, putting it on, messing up my hair. Oh, I forgot to charge it. Oh, I need to plug it in. All this stuff. God forbid someone comes sees you, you look like a complete weirdo, right? Like if someone comes in and like, so what's going on there? Like, when are we actually going to adopt VR? What needs to happen for us to adopt VR? Doesn't matter if we adopt VR. I assume it does, given you're spending your life building VR headsets. Tell us about this topic.
Sure. This is a fantastic question. I love it. Let me give the super short answer first. The super short answer is interesting because it builds on top of what you've said before, 6529 and Charlie, which is if you look at the very, very young kids, like I look at my cousins, they are already using VR almost every day. So you already have, matter of fact, like millions of kids, the very, very young ones that are using VR, that there's almost the only one using it very actively. But still, that does not answer your question of why is it a pain in the ass? And I think you're right, it absolutely is. Some of you might have seen that thread going on Twitter. It's a fascinating one. It's like someone that basically explains that it took them about 35 minutes to get into a multiplayer session with their brother in VR. And so you described the process pretty well. Usually the way it goes is you grab the headset, you try turning it on, nothing happens. So you turn it on, press the button again. Oh, okay, because like when it's turned off, you have to press for a little longer actually. Then it turns on and actually no, there's no battery left. So you have to charge it because the battery drains when it's not plugged in. So you charge it for about, it's pretty long, like it's like 2.5 hours. You charge it for a while, then you take it, then you turn it on. Then you have to, for some reason, it happens sometimes, you have to pair it again with your phone. You don't even really know why. Turn on Bluetooth, pair it with your phone again. Like that's like I shouldn't say that publicly. I actually know how often it happens. The number is crazy. It's like it was a bug that they tracked back at Meta, and it's a crazy one. Anyway, okay, you pair it again. Okay, it's paired. Now you have to update your Facebook account or Oculus account. Actually, if you have an Oculus account, because like me, you were from the early days, you have to turn the Oculus account to a Facebook account. Then you get an error message that does not work on mobile. So you have to go on your laptop, try to log in again, and then it tells you have to turn your Facebook account into a Meta account. I'm really, I swear I'm not making this up. So you convert into a Meta account, you log in again from the headset, which by the way, it's going to be the worst experience in your life if you use a password manager, because most likely you're going to be taking the headset and be like reading on your laptop like that, and with the controller trying to type the text. Okay, you've gone through all of that. Congrats. Now you have to update the software on the headset. So it's going to turn off and update and everything. And then once you do that, you realize actually on the Quest, for some reason, the apps of the OS and the OS itself are not like updated together. So now you think, oh, I'm good, I'm ready, I'm just going to log in with my friends. And you click like the friend app, which is like the most basic operating system app you could imagine. It's like, oh no, that one needs to be updated separately. You're going to update that one. And then you're going to try to join with your friends, and you're going to struggle so hard to join with your friends. Like, I don't want to even describe that process to you, because like then I'm just going to like hijack the whole course just to talk about that. And finally, when you're supposed to be in with your friend, you're all right, that's it. Like, you can hear each other. For some reason, it's just like a regular call, but at least you can hear each other. So now maybe you're going to start, let's say, one of my favorite games, shout out to the developers, Demio. You start Demio, you can hear each other in the Oculus thing, and then you realize, actually, if you're in like a room together with the Oculus thing, it's a different thing than the multiplayer inside the game, even though both of them use the Oculus API. So now you have to get out of the game, get out of the room that you are in the Oculus sort of social thing, create a new one inside the game, and then you're like, you have to send the secret code of that room to your friends. So then you take off the headset and you try to WhatsApp them the code.
I'm getting stressed just listening to this.
Yeah.
And this is why I use the browser.
So
when is this going to go away? When can we actually get into VR without a PhD in computer science?
Exactly. So when is that going to go away? Well, that's what I'm trying to do, and I think that here's my guess. I would say I don't really trust Meta to solve it. I don't really trust HTC either, or Valve. I think their track record shows that they're not going to solve for it. I would say Apple is one that might be able to solve it, and then my company are trying to solve it. And the answer is the most boring one, and it's going to be a very boring answer, but the solution is just, we have a bunch of developers and we're just trying it all day long, and we're just solving those pain points one by one. And it's long and boring, but polishing the edges off and making it smooth is just long and boring work, and that's just what we do. And there's not really any other way around that. So yeah, that's, and once this is solved, then yes, certainly, once you can just grab the headset, put it on, and experience something in VR, as opposed to have like this 35 minutes long process, then yeah, I think it's gonna brutally change the adoption curve, and we can already see that because the very young ones are spending a lot of time in it. So that would be my takeaway.
Okay, I want to ask a related question. I have no inside information, just what I read from Twitter and from Robert Scoble, which we'll bring later into the course. Apple, and I think it's now been delayed, what they were going to do, but their big idea was, or the rumors were, they were developing this super cool AR glasses, and it's Apple, so they're going to be awesome, but turns out they're not going to launch them this year. But they were explicitly saying, you know, the way we get to mass adoption is AR, not VR. Because I guess, you know, you can still see your day. They'll be more like a pair of glasses, not a big bulky headset. What do you think about that?
Yeah, my sort of takeaway on that is, okay, so there's a few things. The first one is, I think people love to say that because AR is easier to understand, and they're looking for a compelling narrative. And AR is not, most of when people think of AR, it's just like kind of like a phone but strapped to your face, so you can just see your phone at all time. So you don't really have to, you know what I mean? It's like you don't really have to sit down and think it through of like, what is a radically new paradigm shift in the way we use computer to understand AR. It's like pretty easy to understand. So to me, I think that whole debate is actually kind of missing the point. And I know people love to ask me that question, but to me, it feels a little bit like as if in the early 80s, people would ask me, do you think do you think I don't know, like fax or cassettes are gonna win? Like, do you think we're gonna send each other data by printing it out like from the computer, or do you think we'll keep it in a, like sort of a digital form and put it on a cassette and send that to each other? Like, what do you think is going to be the best way to send data around? And it turns out like none of those views would have been correct. It's just that those views are like easier to translate into what we already know in the real world. But the one that turned out to be true turned out to be none of those. And so I think here it's kind of like the same thing, where when you go and actually ask the people that use it every day, AR or VR, you realize that like the line is very blurred, because, and that's also my personal belief, which is very soon people are just gonna kind of forget that AR and VR are two different things anyway, because some of the things you need to improve the VR experience look a lot like AR. Like for instance, here's one thing that you've certainly experienced. When you put on the VR headset, like there's my laptop right now in front of me, the fact that I can just like move and sort of bash into the laptop and break it, that's a big issue. So the way to solve that is to actually be able to, when I get close to the laptop, I can see the laptop and I can see it exactly like in real life. And there are many ways to that. You have some displays that are transparent and they can turn on and off the transparency. You have pass-through, where you have cameras that reproject what happens in the real world in the VR headset. But my sort of, the TLDR is, I think it's a false dichotomy that people like to make because they feel slightly disappointed by the adoption curve of VR. And they say, no, but the field is interesting. VR has not taken off as fast as we thought it would. But actually, the thing afterwards is going to take off really fast, and that thing is AR. My take is that lack nuance, and the reality is more nuanced. And the reality is actually those things are going to become kind of the same thing, and we won't really even think of them as separate stuff as time goes on and as adoption continues to grow.
Okay, thank you. Ryan, let's talk about present day adoption now on cyber. From my view, living in this every day, the absolutely most mega native experience is the one that so far has the most adoption. AKA, people use it to show their NFTs, right? So you can't imagine a more like native set of people than people who have NFTs or who create NFTs. And I was like, oh, I would like to show my NFT in a metaverse made out of NFTs, right? Like, so, and I would even say, even within that, what I've seen is the fastest to jump on it are artists, like creators, like the most sophisticated NFT people aren't even the collectors, right? They're the creators. And so, because I've had many discussions with people, hey, should we do this in or can you do this other thing? The ones who say yes instantly require no convincing are NFT artists, which, these are like the apex NFT natives. Mm-hmm. So that part's going well. That seems clear. Where do you see more adoption by less apex digital NFT natives? What do you think comes next?
Yeah, I think that like one thing that's very interesting about OnCyber and how it's got an adoption across like this space specifically is that it's a tool that allows people to build their own world. And kind of like the analogy I have is like almost like when you were a kid and like you were imagining these things and imagining yourself building castles at home out of like pillows or whatnot. Like this is kind of the same feeling that you have whenever you curate it on cyberspace. Like the idea with OnCyber is to make it as easy as possible for anyone, and I say really anyone, from a newcomer into the space to a gamer maybe, but definitely not necessarily for gamers, to go and build worlds. And I think that world building has been popularized by a bunch of apps, like the Sims, for example, or of course, like within the more gamer type of spheres, Roblox and Minecraft and whatnot. But it hasn't gone to my mother. My mother hasn't done world building. I think that on Cyber and like what we're trying to achieve is a tool that allows anyone to be able to build worlds and allows for 3D to be kind of democratized across the hands of everyone, not just 3D modelers or gamers that have been able to like play around with world building in 3D, but really anyone at all. So I think that sure, like I think that the space, the Web3 space is a lot of early adopters, and I think that the fact that artists and collectors, but artists even more impressively, like a lot of the artists we have in the space today are not uh, like big are not crypto OGs or like come from like the Bitcoin days or whatnot. They're not necessarily the biggest technology native people like or whatnot, but they're able to go and um, build with on Cyber and curate their experiences. So I think it's very encouraging that they are able to go and create more than it's a worry that like we don't have enough people curating worlds or whatnot. Um, it's I mean I think what's very interesting about the Web3 space is that you have people from all boards. Like you have people that are tech native, that are crypto native, that are not at all, that are like have always been doing painting, have always been doing something else. It's not like it's easy to pinpoint what kind of um, tech skills or capabilities like someone in Web3 has. So I think that having adoption early and like that kind of a space just is very telling of where this could go. And I am very confident that the moment we are able to go and just make it easier for people outside of Web3 to come in and use those tools and have 3D democratized the way we have for artists and collectors in the Web3 space until now, that's the moment where we are going to see like more adoption across people. I think everyone wants to be a world builder. Everyone like I don't know anyone that would answer no to the question, would you like to get back to the imagination you had whenever you were a kid and building these castles at home with pillows. So I think that if we're able to like give back this effect and this feeling to people all across the Web3 space, the moment we have easier tools to onboard other people outside of Web3, the moment is we're gonna have more adoption clearly. So I mean, I think it's up to us to number one, uh, communicate better as to like what can be done with this tool and like these immersive tools on the web, like that you can come in, build your own world / universe, share it with anyone with a link, and anyone across the world can come and enjoy it in the same way. Now it's up to us to first communicate that, and number two, just build the right tooling for people to be able to come in. Obviously, like we don't expect to be hidden behind a MetaMask Connect forever. Like MetaMask is as much as they've been doing good stuff for the space, like is a very hard tool to use for most people. Web3 browsers in general are pretty hard to use for most people, and calling it a wallet even is pretty confusing to like the people, my friends, and the people who aren't in Web3. So yeah, I think it's up to us to just build the right tooling.
Okay. I'm going to switch now to not the far future, because I'm pretty sure the far future none of us know, given the pace of technological development happening. I assume the AIs will have taken over by then. Let's go for the medium future. It's 2023. Let's say 2030. We'll again start with Charlie. In broadly the field we're talking about, what does the world look like then? How different is it from today? What should we expect? I'm well aware all of us are just guessing, right? So, but at least you're in the field working on real problems. So your guesses are forged from some actual experiences, as opposed to other people who are just guessing. So give us your view of 2030.
Sure. So I think I guess like going back to what Ryan was just saying about the like tooling, you know, right now we are at the skeleton of infrastructure for Web3, which you do need to be like reasonably tech savvy to like make your way through. There's a lot of fleshing out to do. I think by the time we're hitting 2030, that's going to be done to a pretty significant degree. And I mean, the way that I think about Metaverse is that it's like various digital layers on top of the physical world. And I guess the first kind of key point that we need to move to is where it feels like there isn't really a division between physical identity and digital identity, your physical life experience, digital life experience. So I would see 2030 as being like, we've reached a point where the technology is good enough, accessible enough, where we're not thinking about the switch from physical into digital, especially when it comes to socializing. And I think, again, like going back to the 8 to 12-year-olds, this is already their reality, right? They come home from school and then they're in a like audio-based like social platform via Fortnite, for example, and they're just like carrying on with their friends from their day at school. There's no consideration that like I'm switching from physical identity to digital identity. So I think it's getting to the point where that is really widespread. I think there'll be a lot of development still to do, going back to what Maxime is working on about when you're in the virtual space, you want to leave it where that has actually improved your quality of life. I think there's going to be a lot of work to continue to do that, but I think the clear division will have gone or dissolved by that time.
Maxime?
Yeah. Okay. So I agree. It's always hard to do this kind of prediction because you're kind of setting yourself up in a way to look like an idiot because, as always, you miss some stuff and then people look back. But what I can do.
It's 7 years from now. We're safe.
Yeah. Right. So, but still, like we have a company, Unai, and we're trying to. We're investing our time and money, and so one way I can answer is, well, where are we investing, and how does what are some beliefs that where we have put some skin in the game, basically, and where we've put some skin in the game is, I was on a flight to the US recently, and the stewardess starts talking with me, and I told her I work in VR, and told me, oh, my little nephew is super young, he's using that all day, and that's like a new kind of conversation that now I have very often with people, where VR is the thing that someone very young in their family is using a lot, and it's almost like an alternative to using a console. And so in 7 years from now, those 12 to 15 years old, they're going to be old enough to make their own purchase and buy their own content. And there's a few things that are going to change that are pretty fundamental. And so I think it's useful to share that because I think many people are ignoring that in the industry. As you know, VR makes people sick. You get motion sickness, or people have a hard time understanding, having spatial awareness, or there is a social acceptance issue where you look weird if you wear a VR headset. So what is interesting is all those young people that are growing up with VR right now, they won't suffer from those. And so in 2030, what I see is a generation of now very young adults that are looking for better hardware, better software, better experiences. And the other thing that I see is the opportunity window in traditional internet is closing very fast. If you're building an app and putting it on the App Store, you're competing against so many people, so much money, so many momentum, so much stuff. It's like you want to make here's a company I recently invested in that does dating in VR. Well, if you want to do dating in the real world, there's 20 different apps, and they're all owned by a few gigantic billion-dollar groups, and it's really hard to compete. In the VR world, there's a bunch of kids, and and they're building a bunch of apps, and that's where the new space for opportunity is. And so 7 years, more people opportunity are sort of clogged up in the traditional digital world. And so VR becomes one where you can find those opportunities. Now, I want to tie this back into crypto as a way to sort of finish this answer. This is where crypto and VR are hyper, like super relevant to each other, where basically it's going to be super hard to convince Microsoft or EA or any of those very large game publisher to switch to crypto for their games, right? Because they have nothing to, like, frankly, they have nothing to win. They're already making pretty much as much money as they possibly can, right? And the premise of crypto is more so a threat to their business model than something that is going to help them. It's like Apple, Apple is never going to allow you to build a great wallet on iOS. Like, I strongly doubt that, because crypto, to some extent, is threatening some of what enables Apple to have built this monopoly over time. Now, if you look at VR, people like me, we have the opposite problem. We've not built anything. We're starting from complete scratch, and we're looking for people that are super eager, super excited. And if anything, if we can find a way to align a large number of people to collaborate on stuff in a decentralized manner, such that we can try to sort of all group together against those gigantic monopolies, of course, we're going to welcome it with open arms, right? And so the other thing that I see for VR is that all of those things that you see on the fringes of sort of society, right, where Apple might not have much stuff to gain integrating crypto into the iPhone, but I have a lot of things to gain integrating crypto from it, because now all of a sudden I'm attracting users that prior to that I had not any access to. I'm attracting content creators that prior to that I had zero access to. And my closing thought on this will be the following. I believe that software paradigm are often enabled by new hardware, and those things, they come sort of hand in hand. One famous example would be the iMac, which we tend to forget is called the iMac because it stands for Internet Macintosh. And you have to remember that back then it was the first computer that shipped with high-speed sort of modem ports, a web browser inside the OS. Sort of, it shipped with a web browser inside, and it shipped with an OS level SDK for writing apps that connects to the internet. And so it helped their hardware, right? Because it gave them access to a new growing market, and it helped this new set of protocols because now they had a dedicated device that embraced them. And in my case, it's pretty similar. I have a lot to gain by embracing those new standards and trying to accrue value with them over time. And I think those standards are going to have a very hard time convincing Tim Cook to make a great crypto experience on the iPhone and disrupt himself and his own app store. But they're going to have a very easy time convincing me to make my VR headset deeply integrated down to the OS level with crypto. So those would be my predictions.
Okay, very interesting. And Ryan, where are we in 2030?
Yeah, I think one thing that like I would have never guessed is like how much beauty and culture and belonging would be democratizing. I think that my prediction for 2030 is like we build this new space on the web where people can belong and live culture and find beauty every single day. I think it's important for us to just keep on focusing on making sure that it's open and that people can freely come in and leave and not be chained by any type of centralized power. My prediction is that we actually get there through the power of culture, because now that all the creators are on our side, I think it's going to be hard for the centralized systems to go and build as cool experiences or as beautiful experiences online as they can be by this army of decentralized with decentralized collaboration and this army of really cool creators from all across the world. So my guess is it keeps on going, and the decentralized web very soon is just the coolest place ever to like discover content and to live truly live experiences rather than just be consumed by them. So I do predict that we'll get there. There's a lot of people working on it. There's a lot of good intentions. So I believe.
Okay. I'm going to ask the audience to start sending questions to the Unic team, who will feed them to me, and I'll ask them of you. And when you give your questions, let us know if they are general or for a specific person. Right? If you'd like us to address it to someone specifically or just for the panel and whoever wants to answer. While we wait for those to come in, I'll stay with Ryan since we're talking. Are we going to see Ready Player One type things in the next 15, 20 years where we're, genuinely living? I think when I speak to a normal person and I say, oh, Metaverse, right? They imagine a full Ready Player One, a fully photorealistic, fully immersive, full VR economy. And then they look at what's happening on, they're like, okay, well, obviously it doesn't exist right now. And then there's, maybe some disappointment. Okay, well, this isn't happening, or it's not happening now. Is that going to happen? Is that even realistic to think about?
Absolutely. I think that the hardest thing to get past is probably like culture and having people want to do or live experiences online rather than just like visit them or like be pretty much absent while experiencing them. I think that tech is gonna get better at an exponential rate, and like technically for sure, I think there's gonna be a way to do all these photorealistic experiences, and I've seen examples of things that are pretty mind blowing today already. So I don't think it's gonna be it's that far off or like that hard to do. Now, how is it gonna happen? I have no clue. I think that my position on this has always been to just wait and see what people want to do with these things. My perspective is that I'm gonna keep on having very strong, deep like connection with the community and what people actually want to do and like how they want to experience these immersive spaces online, and just keep on building from there. So I think that we could. Ready Player One is like something similar to Ready Player One is something that's pretty much like doable in a few years, but I don't know if it's what people really if it's what people really want to do. What I know is how to ask for the next thing and the next thing. So we'll see.
I'm going to ask this while we wait for the questions coming in, because I think this is partially a hardware topic, because basically, and I'll say this for the audience, like the most common thing that I have in my Discord DMs is Ryan yelling at me about how we're making our spaces to like make performance better for like normal people, right? And and this is, I log in on with a fancy graphic card and a big desktop, and obviously Ryan's correct because a lot of people are logging in on mobile phones or on older computers, and that's with today's experiences that are nowhere close to being photorealistic, right? They are not in a bad way, but sort of cartoonish, right? Like sort of, right? They're definitely not photorealistic. They're definitely not what people see when they watch the movie. And we still struggle with performance. Is this something that, GPUs will take care of it in a decade, or are we waiting, 30 years for this? Or what does the curve look like?
Sure. Okay, that's an excellent question. All right, so the short answer is actually yes. If you just have to be like a little patient, and actually we're going to go there and surprisingly fast. For the people that are interested in stuff like neural radiance fields, which are a type of neural networks for 3D rendering, those are showing incredible results and really fast and improving really, really quickly. And there are a lot of people in the field that, like me, believe that those might be a very short path toward photorealism. Another thing to note is, in general, AI/neural networks enabled rendering is vastly improving the performance of rendering. And GPUs are just kind of by themselves getting better and better. So the short answer is you are certainly getting there. That is for sure. How long is it going to take? I would say that within a decade, it's going to be pretty wild how different those things are going to look. Now, sort of my, and I'll give the short version of it, but my slightly longer answer is I would actually question the premise of the question. And I will actually say, well, do photorealism really matter? And I would question that a lot. And I will say the following. Pixar is an incredible example of how you can convey emotion, meaning, and beauty without photorealism if you just focus your effort on the right stuff. And there's a story, if people are familiar with me, I've told that story a million times, so they might be like super bored about it. But one simple story is when, it's a little morbid at the beginning, but when people die, the first thing that happens is that their eyes dry off. So when because they are dried off, you don't have like any light reflection in their eyes. And as a result of that, the human brain evolved such that when you talk to someone, the first thing that your brain does is look for those light reflection in their eyes. Because if they are missing, it means the person is very, very sick or dying or maybe already dead. And so that's like kind of built deep inside of like the back of your brain. And thus, if I show you a 3D rendering of a world and you're talking with people and I just remove the light reflections in their eyes, it's going to feel really uncanny and you're really not going to have a good time. Like you're going to feel really weird. And those things, I think, are going to have quite a big impact. Knowing what details are needed for people to have this sort of comfortable feeling. But the overall look and photorealism, I would strongly push back against the idea that it's necessary. And I think VR chat is a good example. So the overall takeaway is people in the industry, like people making anime or Pixar or to some extent VR chat, although I think we're still very far from like the level of quality needed, I think are kind of proof that photorealism isn't really needed as much as people think it is, as long as you nail the right details. And you might think that, yeah, but all the rooms, they look bad in VR. Like like virtual cafes, most of them in VR, like I don't feel good in them. I'm sure with photorealism, it would feel better. And again, I would slightly push back against that once more and say the following. Most cafes that I've been to where I feel good, one of the reasons that I feel good in it is because it's built upon literally like hundreds of years of like interior designers iterating on how to make a place feel comfortable. And it turns out what makes you comfortable in VR and the real world are two different things. And you don't have that kind of like care and experience and for VR where people have just spent like 20,000 hours trying to find how to make people comfortable in virtual spaces. And I think part of like the revolution is not necessarily having it be photorealistic, but just sort of as an industry learning how to make those spaces more comfortable.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, for the foreseeable future, I mean, I'm a 24 by 24 pixel punk, right? So like, it works fine for emotion and identity and branding. But it's also, I want to like hold us to a objective truth. It's not like we tested the photorealistic and decided it didn't work. We just can't do it. So it's extremely convenient if we conclude that the photorealistic's not any good. This is like me concluding that dunking a basketball isn't a good thing. I mean, I wasn't going to dunk a basketball anyway, so it's better that I conclude that it's not a good thing, right? So I do think people wonder about this, right? And you can say, oh, you can watch Pixar. And they say, sure, I can watch Pixar, but I can also watch a regular movie.
Right.
Right? We also have regular movies. We don't just have animated movies, right? I mean, a question I asked Ryan before this session, or as we started the session, I actually don't know the answer. I don't think any of us know the answer. We could have done this on the campus as avatars, with voice. it could be 3 avatars standing in campus talking. 4 of us, sorry. Is it better or worse that we're projected on a 2-dimensional screen and we can see your faces at least? I mean, not mine, but yours. I don't know. I don't know the answer, right? I don't know which one's better. And I mean, I'm sure we'll do both, right? And try both over time. But it's a very interesting question to me, because I've thought about this the whole course. I sit in these sessions, and these sessions are a Zoom. And so we're projecting a Zoom into a 3D world. I'm like, well,
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'll add to that. I'll add one thing to that is that yeah, we have been projected as a 2D but we like I've been dancing with like a bunch of people in the crowd for a while, and like we did a bunch of different dances in the flash mob. So I think my answer to this is that it will only take trying things out with people and seeing what works and what doesn't work, etc. There's no way to go and get a magic recipe as of like what is better to do like a university course in an immersive space. Like maybe in the future it will get back to this, to feel the real emotions of people. Maybe like we'll have face tracking technologies that like do it well. I don't know, but I think that our goal, and I think our the mission of all the people experimenting in this is to actually experiment and try to see what does make sense, what does catch with people, what doesn't catch with people, and try to navigate in that way. But yeah, if one thing I can
I
say,
agree,
like
I agree. No, we're going to experiment, right? But literally in
yeah.
this box, there's one of us who is not photorealistic, and that works, and 3 of you who are photorealistic, and I'm spending the whole time wondering, like, which one's better? And I mean, it's not like I look at you and say, oh, really, I wish Maxime would, like, disappear and become an avatar, right? Like, I like seeing you, right? And so, it's an interesting question. Okay, we have a couple of questions that come in. The first one I'm sending to Charlie because, and I don't expect you to have, like, an official answer to this, but I think it's a fair question. For the general panel, but since you had mentioned all your cousins, I'm going to go to you. What about the mental health aspects of 8 to 10-year-olds or even 12-year-olds, whatever, going directly into VR after school and not doing normal kid things like playing outside?
Well, I guess yes, it's a big question. When you're thinking about like what's happening in terms of brain chemistry, like is there a reason that they're impacting their mental health negatively by feeling like they have a safe space to socially interact, where they can be themselves, where they can fully explore their identity that maybe they might not have outside in a physical environment? It's such a sort of sweeping generalization. I think like there's a lot that we've learned from Web2 social media about the impact of like Web2 on mental health, especially where your identity and how much people like your identity in the digital world becomes kind of currency for status, right? Like we've seen that that's a problem. We have like the opportunity now where we can be building out Web3 with all of the learnings of where Web2 severely fucked up when it comes to mental health, and start to try to address those problems. But I think it's kind of it's a very like cliched question. It's the assumption that it's going to be healthier for a child to be participating in X space versus Y space because that's how I grew up, and we don't really have the data to support that that's the case. Like I certainly know, a lot of people in the younger generation who have the opportunity to explore who they are via an alter ego, where they aren't subject to the judgment of their peers, the fear of being like documented and posted on like Web2 social media by their peers. Like they can really start to experiment in a way that's become progressively harder with like sort of photo and video based social media. So arguably being avatar based in a VR space or within a game is healthier because they get to do all these things that have been I guess becoming more and more like socially restrictive over time. So I think there's just like so much nuance to this that gets missed when it's like, well, I grew up like this, and I think it's bad that these kids aren't growing up the same way.
Maxime, do you want to comment on this too?
I think I have a very similar perspective. I will add, I think it's a great question to ask, but even more importantly, so as you know, I'm sure a lot of you in the audience listening to this are considering going into crypto. I think the people prior to us, like people building social medias maybe in the early 2000s or computers in like the 90s, might have had a path, like a pass for not having built a very strong sort of answers to those questions, because like it was hard to prove that those things, like that digital world could have an adverse effect. I think now that we've seen that actually they can have an adverse effect, like, you know, no one is like, oh, I'm so happy I spent 20 hours on Instagram this week. Now that we've like observed that, I think it's good to be critical. And my pushback to being critical would be very similar to Charlie. Most of the greatest, coolest stuff I've learned and discovered about myself, and that sort of became core part of who I am and my identity, that was through virtual worlds. So I do as much as I try as hard as I can to try to identify what could go wrong and try to fix it. But I'm an optimist that actually we can fix a lot of the stuff that might go wrong.
And Ryan, do you also want to comment on this?
I mean, like everything else has been said, like by Charlie and Maxim. I don't know what I could add, really.
It's interesting because like I hear it and my like natural reaction is, oh yeah, that sounds worrisome. And then I also remember when I was growing up, there was like all types of anxiety about video games. And I spent my teenage years like every afternoon, like with my friends, and sometimes we play basketball or whatever, and sometimes we just sit there playing video games all afternoon. And as far as I can tell, everyone grew up to be a responsible adult, and like that was fine. Like I mean, but if you listen to what people were saying, then I don't know, it was going to be the end of the next generation. It'll be a total disaster, and it was fine. Like everyone kind of grew up and had a perfectly normal life, and none of us seem to have been negatively affected by video games. And now, of course, the studies come out and say, like maybe actually video games are good for you. And, you know, who knows if that's true either. But, like, it certainly wasn't anything resembling the panic that, for some reason, if you're playing Sega or PlayStation or what have you, things were going to go wildly wrong in your life. Like, quite the opposite. It was at worst neutral. Okay, I have another quite general question, which is hard, but I think it's a good question. How do you see the metaverse, and we can take this in reverse order, we'll start with Ryan. How do you see the metaverse impacting society, and specifically, what steps should be taken to ensure that it is inclusive and equitable for all? That's a very broad scope to play in. Ryan,
Yeah, no, it's a very, very good question. I think to my point of my prediction within 7 years, like I would have never guessed that online I would be able to see so much beauty every single day. I think by scrolling through my Twitter feed or going to On Cyber, like every single day, I'm confronted with really, really cool stuff, new stuff I didn't know, art, creativity, and I think if anything, what the metaverse has managed to accomplish until now for like a small group of people is to like democratize beauty and to make sure that people can access culture and art in a way that they couldn't before. I think I personally like would access art just once every month and a half whenever I would go to a gallery or go to like I don't know a museum or whatnot. But nowadays, like every single day, like I see new creations being put on Saber and on Twitter being shared. I see new artists I didn't know. I get um, I get addicted to like certain art styles that I didn't know I liked, and so I think that that's something that one positive that it managed to do. I think that one thing that we really have to do to make sure that this keeps on going is accessibility, and to make sure that any creative from all across the world, or any art enjoyer, or any person in general, because we are all creatives by default. We are all born creatives. We are all born collectors. We're all born art enjoyers, and I think that the one thing we need to do is to make sure that the platforms we're on are as accessible as possible to everyone, and that those platforms don't become the exact same platforms we're using now that are not accessible to everyone and that can lock people out of their own accounts, etc. So I think that that's one thing we need to do. But overall, I think that if we manage to do that through the principles of decentralization, we get to a really, really good result that I start seeing every single day today, and I know a lot of people around me as well are seeing, which is democratizing belonging, democratizing culture, democratizing beauty, and I think it's really important for humans to be able to be confronted with that as well. I don't know
Anyone
if
else want to hop into that one?
Sorry?
Anyone else want to take a shot at that
Sorry.
one?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I mean, as I'm like working specifically in digital identity, there's a huge weight of responsibility when we're thinking about like diversity and representation. Anybody that's building in the like avatar space, identity space. I think the first thing that's important, where building Web3 now, we already have a much more diverse cross section of builders than we had in the earlier stages of the internet. So the first thing that's important, I think, especially if you're creating around identity, is making sure that everybody who is contributing to how that builds out and how you're representing people, that you have a very diverse cross section of opinions and cultures that are coming into the mix when you figure out how you're building that out. And then the other piece, as Ryan said, everybody is fundamentally creative. I mean, we've just seen over the last year how AI has started to democratize creativity, right? You don't need to be amazing at drawing to become an artist or become a creator. So I think, for you as a human to fulfill the full joy of the human experience, you need to be able to create stuff. So there is also a responsibility to democratize access to creation, and technology is making that increasingly easy. So I guess those are the two pieces that I'm focused on, given that we're building for identity and we're building for allowing people to easily create and customize their identity.
Yeah, if I can just finish this thought, like there's a quote I read in Rick Rubin's book lately. Rick Rubin is a very famous music producer who's worked with people was at the inception of Def Jam in the 90s and worked with every single artist you can think of. And like there's one quote of his that really struck by me and like my mission with OnCyber, and I'll read it now. Regardless of whether or not we're formally making art, we're all living as artists. We perceive, filter, and collect data, then curate an experience for ourselves and others based on this information set. Whether we do this consciously or unconsciously, by the mere fact of being alive, we are active participants in the ongoing process of creation. And I think that's really important as like to what we're doing in Web3 and how we're able to just like bring this flame of creativity back to every single person that's a participant.
Great. I have a question that I don't know we'll get an answer to, but I feel professionally obligated to ask. Maxime, when's your headset coming out? Came from the group.
Unfortunately, we're not communicating dates publicly yet. However, you can email me, and I'm adding people to our alpha and betas list all the time. Write me a short blurb about yourself, where you care about VR, and I'll do my best to add you to one of our spots.
There's a second part of the question I suspect is going to get the same answer, but I'm going to ask it also. Does your headset have a name yet?
A what? Sorry?
Does it have a name yet?
Oh, a name yet. You can follow me on Twitter. I'll be announcing stuff pretty soon. But sorry again, we've hired too many people from Apple, and so we took that from them. We tried to be very stealthy with a lot of the stuff.
Absolutely respect that, but I had to shoot my shot on behalf of the studio audience. There's a question that I think I can answer. Can we expect more avatars as NFTs for integration? And I think the answer is yes, but probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 months away on various things. So we're working on it and expect cool things happening there. Is that we okay with that, Ryan, as an answer?
Yeah, totally. I think like again, as for everything we do, everything is experimental. We very often do QA in prod, and so like this was one of the examples where we just pushed avatars as quick as we could with like a very optimized system. So like on the web right now, we could render like 1,000 avatars next to each other and it would run on an iPhone. So it's like we had to just have one to be able to like achieve that feat and then be able to optimize more to be able to add more. I think within the next 2 months, yeah, we'll be able to have many more avatars and truly have like identity in the form of avatars within OnCyber.
Okay, we are at time, so I wanted to thank all three of our panelists for taking the time to meet with us. We very much appreciate your insights. We will turn this into an NFT soon, and I think soon, beyond that, soon we'll have our better organizational model and how we display all of these both on the campus in the 3D space, but also how people can find them on the web. Because like this panel, there have been a lot of great panels and sessions, and I think these are great things for people to watch, whether they were here today at specifically this time. And so we think that's an important part of helping to educate the space. So I appreciate you doing that. We'll let you know once they're minted. You can share them, use them, and we'll find a model where when our front end comes that people can open mint them into their wallet if you want to keep this for posterity's sake, make it immutable so you can show your grandchildren how wrong your predictions for 2030 were. And laugh about it with them. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It was a pleasure.